Now we will look at half-angle formulas. Okay, these are used when I don't necessarily know the trig function for the original angle, a half angle, but I do know the trig function value for the single angle. On these, you may want to take a moment and write down these formulas. The first thing I'd like to point out about the formulas is that for 3 of these, there is a plus and minus sign that's written in front of the formula. That doesn't mean plus and minus like it does in the quadratic formula, meaning that there's 2 answers. It means that you must choose one of these based on the quadrant of the half angle and the sign of the trig function in that quadrant. So in other words, if I know that my half angle is in quadrant 3 and I'm computing the sign of a half angle in quadrant 3, I know that sine in quadrant 3 would end up being a negative because my y value is negative. And so in that case, I'd want to choose the negative value of the square root of 1 minus cosine alpha over 2. All right? In every single one of these formulas, the angle that you have originally is what we call a half angle. It's alpha over 2, but then you notice the actual value in the formula is a single angle, alpha. All right? Once you have these formulas written down, let's go and look at an example. Use a half angle formula to find cosine of 7 pi over 12. On the test, if I want you to use a specific formula, in other words, a double angle or a half angle, I will say so. If I don't say so, then you may need to figure out which formula do I need to use, a double or a half. In this case, it would be halfway easy to find out that I need a half angle formula. Notice that your denominator is 12. Normally, we know how to find things that have denominator 6. Those are 30-degree reference angles. Well, this is half of that. So, first thing you want to do is you want to take your angle, knowing that it's a half angle, and you want to set it to alpha over 2. Okay? Alpha over 2, this particular angle, let's just figure out first which quadrant we would be in for alpha over 2. Okay, 7 pi over 12. Well, 12 pi over 12 would be in there somewhere. All right, we know this is pi over 2. Pi over 2 is something over 12 is 6 pi over 12. And so we know in this case that pi over 12 falls somewhere with, 7 pi over 12 falls somewhere in quadrant 2. So I'm going to identify here that pi over 2 is in quadrant 2. Now that being the case, the sign I want to choose on cosine of 7 pi over 12, we know would need to be a negative. Okay, in quadrant 2, the x values are negative, the r values are positive, and so we know that the cosine value would be negative. All right, the second thing is I'm going to take what I have written down here, and I'm going to solve this for alpha. Okay, to do that, multiply both sides by 2. And so in this case, we can do a little bit of reducing over here. All right, and we find out that 7 pi over 6 is my single angle. 7 pi over 6 I know has a reference angle of 30 degrees. And so I know that I can find trig function values for 7 pi over 6, while I couldn't for 7 pi over 12. All right, I'm going to draw another picture for 7 pi over 6. So this is my picture for plano alpha. Okay, 7 pi over 6, we know that 6 pi over 6 is right here. So 7 pi over 6 is one rotation past there. Okay, or one, additional rotation of pi over 6 past there. We know this is a reference angle of 30 degrees. That being the case, we can label our signs. Negative, square root of 3, 2, and negative 1. Okay, now, we were asked to find the value of cosine of 7 pi over 12. Okay, what we decided that that was a half angle. All right. We know that the formula for our half angle is plus or minus square root of 1 plus cosine of the single angle all over 2. We needed to make a decision about, is it going to be a plus or a minus? We talked about earlier, since the half angle is in quadrant 2, we need to choose a negative. And then on the inside of this function, we need to now look at what's the cosine of the single angle. I'll scroll up and look at the picture we have here. This is the single angle. Cosine of the single angle is x over r. That would be negative square root of 3 over 2. And then in the formula we have all of this is over 2. Alright, from here, let me show you what you need to do to simplify this. Okay, we keep the negative sign out in the front. On the inside, we see that we have a fraction within the numerator. And so what I'll do to clear that fraction out is I will multiply every single term by whatever's in that denominator. The denominator I'm concerned about is that 2, so I'm going to multiply everything on the top by 2 and everything in the bottom by 2. Okay, doing that, I'm going to have to distribute on the top. So this would end up being 2. I've got plus and negative, which would end up being negative. The 2's on the second fraction would cancel, so I have square root of 3. And then in the denominator, I have a 4. Now, there's different ways to reduce this out. This particular problem is mathematically not going to get reduced all of the way, but here's what I will tell you. If in the denominator you have something that's a perfect square, you can go ahead and break this up as the root of the top over the root of the bottom, and then you can reduce that bottom number. And so you would have negative square root of 2 minus square root of 3, and then all over 2. I will accept that as my final answer.